Hello, travelers. Welcome to Reach the World's Explorer program. For over 20 years, Reach the World has inspired youth to become curious, confident, and compassionate global citizens through virtual exchange. My name is Tim, and I'm so glad you're joining us for today's live stream event. Today, we're continuing our exploration of the world of modern maps. I'm very pleased to welcome Clinton Johnson, Esri's Racial Equity Unified Team Lead. Clinton's here to help us better understand the ways that modern maps help us solve some of the world's toughest challenges. Clinton uses maps to increase racial justice in healthcare, education, and many other areas. And today is going to show us how maps can reveal what's hard to see, how they tell stories about the world, how they explain complex challenges, and how they can guide action. If you haven't already read Clinton's wonderful article on the Reach the World virtual exchange site, I'd encourage you to do so. We'll share the link in the chat bar on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you're just joining us and want to reserve your classroom's place on this virtual exchange expedition, we'll add that registration link in the chat bar too. Finally, I want to give a special welcome to the teachers and students who are joining us live today. Please feel free to use the YouTube chat bar to let us know you're here, where you're joining from, and of course to share any questions you have for Clinton as we go. We'll get to as many questions and cover as much ground as we can in the next 30 minutes. So without any further delay, it's time to explore the world of modern mapping. Clinton, welcome to Reach the World.
Thanks, Tim. Really glad to be here. Great introduction. Hopefully I can live up to it. As Tim said, my name's Clinton. I almost never go by Clint, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. And I just want to emphasize a little bit of what Tim was saying in terms of like why maps are so great. I won't remember everything from the article exactly as I wrote it, but I think it's always been intriguing to me that in the same way that people say that pictures tell a thousand words, well, maps themselves are pictures, and with maps you can tell a story. And not all of us are great artists and can pick up a pen or pencil or marker or crayon even and draw something in a really robust way. But more and more maps are becoming something that more and more of us can just go online and start to play with and create our own maps. Well, all those words in a picture, well, they tell stories. So since more and more of us are getting empowered to be able to create maps and use maps, then we can start to tell the stories about the experiences that we have that are important, or the experiences that other people are having that we think are important. And maps can also be told on their own and with words to add more story to it. One of the other really important things about maps is that, just like with a picture, right? Like sometimes you watch you can look at a bunch of tables of data if that's something that you're interested in, and sometimes I am. You can read through tons of articles that are just trying to describe something, but sometimes you just need to watch a little movie and suddenly you've learned so much about what someone was trying to explain, or you see a picture or a series of pictures and you get what you really can sort of see what was happening. So likewise with maps, you can take complicated information and make it simple, put it in a visual format so you can actually visualize it. And when I think about all of that together, and when I think about some of the really important stories that we're all learning about or trying to share that will help us to change the world, make the world better, increase racial justice is a big, for instance, a significant for instance, as far as I'm concerned, then that ability to convey 1,000 words, to tell an important story, to bring together lots of important information, you can help people make better decisions about the actions that they, to understand, like, hey, if I do things this way or that way, how will it affect folks? Well, you can use maps to tell that story. And in terms of my journey and how I got into GIS, that's a part of how I got there. I was working at the city of Philadelphia for our streets department. I think some other folks will call it public works, and I had some responsibility for helping decide whether or not something should go on top of the sidewalk or the street, or go above it or below it. And there were maps behind me all day, every day. The maps that were behind me were on paper. They were actually on a kind of paper that we don't really make too much anymore. It's pretty sturdy, because these maps were from the 1800s and the early 1900s, and they showed where lots of pipes were underground in Philly. And I'll never forget one of the first projects that someone was working on when I started working at the city of Philadelphia, an intern. He was trying to find where the snow melting machines were distributed across the city. And the first thing I was like, snow melting machines, that's a thing. And we had that. So somewhere scattered around the city, there were these machines that sat underground. And when it snowed, they would warm up and they would melt the snow. And we lost them. Those maps were not digital. They were difficult to read. And as you add more and more things to those maps, the lines cross over each other and it almost looks like scribble scrabble. And it was someone's job to now try to find those and put it into technology. And as I'm working in this organization where we're using maps to inform lots of actions and to make things better for people around the city, I started to remember some of the things that I learned about in school about redlining, where cities, including Philadelphia, many cities across the country were segmented, chopped up into pieces, and people made decisions about who could live where and why they could live there and what they'd have access to. I realized that in the same ways that map have been used to create bad situations for folks, we could use maps to create better outcomes for folks. And I started to do just lean more into GIS, and I realized that there was a whole set of opportunities to drive change, to make things better for people, but also career opportunities to to provide for myself and my family. And GIS is one of these really special things that brings together maps and stories and data and technology in really interesting ways. So I'm excited to talk more about that with you all.
All right, great. In your article, you had listed a bunch of things that maps can do for us. And I mean, whether you're talking about missing snow melters or you're talking about sort of a hidden force that's affecting a city like redlining, you're giving a great example of how maps can reveal things that are hard for us to see. Can you included in your article a very powerful and interesting example of how like redlining worked in St. Louis? Can you sort of walk us through that and talk about what that map is showing us?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So I'm going to walk through this, and I may use some some complicated language, and I'm going to just tell you what it made me discover about my own lived experience. But here we're showing how we're just looking at the past in St. Louis, and we're looking at things like the history that they had with segregation and redlining, and what did that mean? Like, well, okay, well, the areas were broken up into sections. There were decisions made about who could live where. Um, People of color, Black people in particular, were largely only allowed to be in the spaces that were mostly red, or because they were there, the areas became mostly red. And so, what is the outcome of segregating people based on their race or their ethnicity? Well, as it turns out, redlining and segregation, they've been linked to temperatures in neighborhoods. What's that mean? Well, this is a map that is pulling together lots of data about what temperatures look like on a very hot summer day in 2019 in St. Louis. And we see here that there's A, B, C, D scattered around the map, and that indicates where those areas were redlined, broken up as A, best, B, still desirable, C, declining, D, hazardous. And and the bluer areas were more cool and the redder areas were more hot. And so this map is showing that there's a relationship. And so when we look at this grade A area, we want to focus in on this one. It was one of the coolest areas in St. Louis on that day. And those cooler temperatures have been linked to high tree coverage, lots of trees in the area, high vegetation, grass and gardens. On the other hand, there's this grade D area or hazardous, and it was one of the warmest areas, and has of course been linked to less trees, less vegetation, less grass, but also to higher proportions of paved surfaces. And while it sounds kind of trivial or maybe not that important to think about, well, how hot it is in one neighborhood versus another. Well, what does it mean when it's hotter? Well, people have to run the air conditioner more. So there's higher energy costs for folks who are in hotter areas. The heat actually impacts some chronic health conditions. Some of you may have asthma or know other kids who do have asthma. And so the hotter temperatures make it harder for folks who have these conditions, and it also affects other health conditions. And the CDC says that these temperature increases are impacting cities all across the country: St. Louis, Baltimore, Philadelphia, so many other cities, and they're expected to continue to increase for decades to come. Now, what that all meant to me when I learned about this study, I thought back to my life growing up. So when I grew up in Philadelphia, I grew up in two areas. I started out in North Philadelphia, which, as it turned out, was a redlined area, and it was one of the more impoverished areas of the city, and it was always hot in the summertime. Oh my God, it was so hot, and you could see the heat just radiating off of the street in waves, and it just felt so hot. And then we moved to Overbrook, to West Philadelphia, to the neighborhood where the Fresh Prince actually, Will Smith, grew up in, and where in the neighborhood I grew up in North Philadelphia, there was like 2 trees on the whole block, and there were like 100 families on this block. When I got to Overbrook, to West Philadelphia, suddenly there was like a tree every third house, and it just wasn't that hot. And I never made that connection. I thought I was imagining that it was hotter in North Philadelphia than it was in that part of West Philadelphia that I was in, but it wasn't. It wasn't my imagination. There was some design to which families at the time of segregation and redlining were going to get access to more trees, and which ones instead were going to get access to more asphalt. And it had a lasting impact.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing those. I mean, a number of really powerful maps. What I think is interesting, and I'm curious to see if you agree with this, is that maps like that take something that, for example, you felt as a kid, you felt that it was hotter in certain areas, and it puts hard data behind it, and it shows you just very clearly that it's a thing. Again, you're revealing something that's hard to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Those maps were pictures that told this. I felt like they told the story of my life, and you all may have experiences that you're having in your communities that maybe you think other people aren't having in theirs, and maybe it's hard sort of to describe what that is, and maybe you feel like it's just yourself. But imagine if you got together with all the other students in your class, and you all sort of documented what your experiences were, and you somehow were able to put that on a map, and suddenly all of that information can come together and tell your story, tell your real life stories, and then that helps I'm sure it will help you validate your own experience. You can see that other people may be having your same experience. Validate, maybe, confirm your idea that maybe some people are having certain experiences and other people are having different experiences. And this is what people are trying to understand when they're using maps. For any kind of business or organizations trying to use maps to understand what people's experiences are, whether it's with, hey, it's Postmates and I want to make sure that people get their food quickly. Are there areas where I need to focus differently? You know, it's you're trying to deliver a package from Amazon, or you're a government trying to provide services to neighborhoods, and you want to make sure that you aren't making things worse for some neighborhoods while you're making them better for other neighborhoods. And maps can help all of us in the world understand that stuff better.
Great. I'm curious in terms of identifying some of these really big, challenging problems. You gave some good examples just then about Postmates that a lot of us might recognize as, how do you get food delivered to your house, or how do you get, I think about a company like Amazon with these like delivering packages all over the world. How do they get things where they need to go and make sure everybody has equal access to quick delivery? We've seen how maps can identify big challenges, some of them very serious. How can maps start to help us address those?
Yeah, great question, Tim. So, a lot of people quote a saying, and I don't know the source of it, but understanding precedes action. So before you take action, you should probably understand some things first. Well, honestly, every decision that you're making that decision based on whatever information you have. And organizations are always trying to make sure that they have the most accurate information every single day, every time they're deploying teams to do one thing or another, making decisions about where to invest money or to invest time or to invest energy. They want to have the right information in front of them. So first and foremost, we can turn what we see in the map into information. And I wish I had an example to show right now of a dashboard where, you can show visually where there are problems, and then you can also quantify where there are problems. And then people look at those dashboards and they say, hey, well, there's a problem right there. That's where we need to focus our energy today. Or hey, you've got 5 locations to go to today. If you go to them in this particular order, then you'll get to all of them in a timely fashion, right? Just imagine how hard it is for those Amazon trucks, as many of them as there may be. There's so many packages to deliver. So there's so many more packages to deliver than there are Amazon trucks. How do they get to us on time so consistently that we can get that 2-day free shipping? How does Amazon feel comfortable getting to that point where they're using maps to understand where things are? But you can also use maps to deploy your resources. So they're also using maps to deploy those trucks. And then they're also, as a delivery happens, right? Like we get that notification right away. Postmates sends you your order, and nowadays, particularly in the pandemic, it's sitting outside, and you know about it because you got an alert. Well, how is that happening? Well, they've navigated to your location. They've pressed the button saying it's been delivered. They've taken a picture, and all of that gets geo-referenced, and also all of that is on a map, and they're using it to understand how they're actually doing work. And then someone is making more maps and doing more analysis to understand what all of that means to increase more understanding for the next set of deliveries. So it's, understanding, getting information right in front of you so you can make better decisions. It's directing actions, right? Whether it's navigating people, routing folks, picking the best location for the best person for the location, or if it's understanding what we've done, right? So like we've delivered, we've provided services, we've sold products. Where have we done that? Who have we done it with? And how do we take all that understanding to build the next dashboard to lead to the next set of actions that we track and manage over and over again?
Yeah, it's interesting to explore the idea of maps and how maps are used to make decisions, that all that information is presented in a story, and that story inspires people to take action and make decisions and make changes in the world based on what they see. Is there an area that modern mapping is working on right now that's exciting to you, that you feel like really like presenting data in an easy to understand way is help us move forward in some significant way?
Yeah, I, my focus is on helping organizations increase racial justice and to increase inclusion for folks from all walks of life. And so it's not, so that's not a new problem, right? That's a problem that societies have been trying to address for a long time. But we're starting to use GIS and data, the maps and analysis that goes along with that, machine learning, artificial intelligence to to aid in that work. In fact, that analysis the maps that I showed you about St. Louis, well, how did they determine which areas had more asphalt or which areas had more vegetation? Well, in part, they were using machine learning and artificial intelligence to look at imagery of flyovers of a city to determine what set of pixels on a picture was a tree or grass or a garden versus which were probably paved surfaces, sidewalks or streets, asphalt themselves. So I think there's a lot of really interesting ways that the GIS, that maps are like a platform to bring together so many different things. Data, apps, technology, artificial intelligence, drone mapping, all of these things are coming together in some really interesting ways to help us tackle in a new way a long-standing set of challenges.
Very interesting. Kids always like to know what your daily life is like at your job. What is your on the average day as a map maker, as someone who works in modern maps? What is your day-to-day life like?
Yeah, one thing I want to point out for sure is that GIS is a broad field, and I think when it comes to any tech space, any STEM space, there are lots and lots of roles that people can play. You're gonna find that certainly some people are making maps all the time, some people are doing analysis all the time, some people are creating data sets, some people are creating apps, some people are building pieces of technology, and then there are other people who are managing projects and managing work that ensure that the folks' needs are getting met. There are some people who are just engaging with customers, trying to understand what their needs are. And so I spend a lot of time overseeing the work of several teams of people who are, or people from several teams that are doing lots of those things. There are folks who are creating maps and data and story maps that'll help inform action for some of the organizations that we're supporting. There are people who are building training resources so that people can learn how to do some of this stuff on their own online. There are people who are just trying to figure out where to get started, and how to start doing this work. And I spend a lot of time overseeing a lot of that work, talking to a lot of people about what their issues are, trying to understand what their priorities are, so that we can then make the best maps and make the best apps to help address their needs. Meetings all day. I take some time sometimes to like plan what comes next, understanding what patterns we see, and taking time to build presentations to make that work, and then working with teams to get the right maps created.
Okay, yeah, for any student who likes the idea of using maps to solve big problems or identify and come up with solutions to big problems in our society, what set of skills would make a really great future Esri employee?
Great question. So we really do see ourselves as trying to help folks solve some of the world's toughest challenges. So problem solving is a big skill set, and that's something that people may or may not in your life. You may feel like sometimes folks don't value your ability to solve problems day to day, but I do. I personally feel like when I was 9 and 10, 11 and 12, that's where I was really developing a capacity to solve problems. You're dealing with issues all the time, and it's not always easy to share them with folks. And so that problem solving that you are doing right now, bring that same energy into a career in GIS. Then, of course, you're going to want to take that and apply it to maybe it's, hey, one problem set is, well, how do we take what people are experiencing and turn that into data? Like, how do we create the right surveys, and how do we create the right data tables, and then how do we do the right analysis to really reflect what folks are experiencing? Some ways that you're going to apply that problem solving is, okay, well, I've got all this analysis, I have all this data, someone's done all that work. Well, how do I tell a compelling story with all that information that really will solve a problem? And then you got folks who there's all these capabilities available, but your organization has a certain thing that they're focused on doing. Your Amazon, you're delivering packages. Your Postmates, you're delivering food. You're a health and human services agency, and you are trying to make sure that everyone is as healthy as they can be. Well, now, how do you take those priorities and use the right combinations of maps and data and analysis and machine learning to solve those problems? So I'm harping on problem solving, and then you can take that problem solving and then also storytelling and apply it anywhere you feel most comfortable.
One of the things we talk about a lot in Reach the World's Explorer program is this idea of being curious about the world around you. Does curiosity play a role in the challenges that you approach?
Absolutely. In some ways, it really is important to bring your perspective to things, and a part of it is like the questions that you ask about what you're seeing, the questions that you ask about what other people are experiencing. And so like, and being really curious and pushing boundaries and just asking questions all the time. I think in a lot of ways, I move through life through questions, and the answers to the questions tell me what to do next. And in this work of GIS, there's nothing more important to us than being interested in what other people are challenged with, being interested in what people are experiencing, and being interested in trying to create better outcomes for folks. So curiosity, being more interested than you're trying to be the person who is interesting, is something really important to us.
All right, great. In my introduction to you, I mentioned that you can use GIS to increase racial justice in healthcare and education and other things. Can you give an example of how, for example, modern maps could help us, improve access to education or improve healthcare for all people?
Yeah, one maybe maybe it's too high level, and then you'll ask me better questions. But a big question around how we, the outcomes that communities experience in terms of education. Who's getting high school diplomas? Who's able to go off to college? That sort of thing. It really begins with, well, what do we have access to? When I was growing up, I went to a high school that did not provide certain math courses. And I wanted to go to college for engineering. And so now, how was I going to do that without the right math courses? And that was a school that was available to myself. It was a school that was available to people in a certain community. And so what could you do about that? So fortunately, my mother was savvy and crafty, and she found a different path. And a part of it was, well, where is a program that we can get to that'll close that gap? In a lot of ways, people are trying to find the right resources to help close those kinds of gaps. And so maps help. They tell us, okay, well, this community, if they're being served by that school that does not have AP courses, right? Like if you're in a school that has AP courses, then you have access to things that will prepare you for college in a way that people who are in a school that doesn't have access to. And so maps help us figure out which communities are going to be impacted by that. Maps also help us figure out, well, how do we get people from this community access to those resources that do have it? So what is the closest school or the closest program that does or doesn't have those resources? And we can flip that around and we can talk about healthcare too. So where are prenatal clinics? Are there enough in the communities? Are they equitably distributed across communities? Are they where people actually, where the needs are greatest? Where is quality healthcare? Where can I get great treatment to manage my chronic health conditions like asthma, diabetes, and so on? We can really use maps to figure out which communities do or don't have access and where they can get access to other resources.
I kept hearing you say where, and what you're saying, and it brings me back. Last week we had a great conversation with your colleague Charlie, who was explaining Esri's motto of the science of where. And it sounds like you can use modern maps to really understand why things are where they are exactly, and how you can bring people together with the things they're trying to access through this incredible technology.
Yep. That sums it up nicely.
Well, this 30 minutes has really flown by, Clinton. I really want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights and your use of modern mapping to solve some of the world's biggest challenging questions. It's been really nice talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks also to our entire on-camera and YouTube live stream audience for the questions. We had a couple that I sort of worked into the conversation today. There's a lot more to explore within the world of modern mapping, and I want to make sure everybody here doesn't miss a single article or video call with the Esri team. We have a couple more weeks coming up and a lot more interesting discussions to go. So you can find a complete listing of upcoming Reach the World events at home.reachtheworld.org. Clinton, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim, and thanks for the great work your org does.